sideways, but it don't come down. It's like, yeah. I think it's see, it's got no way to adjust it. Anyway, yeah, it's just a kind of a visual anyway, just so we'll know where we're at. I should have done this from the start, just to kind of. So the first one will be the rapture. I know y'all won't be able to read this, but I'll tell you what it is, what it says. And so then we got 3.5 years. And again, I'll tell you what these things say. So, anyway, I'm not going to be using this much, just kind of referencing where we're at as far as like in the tribulation time. So this right here, this is pre-rapture. All this would be the church age. So that would be the church age, all the way back to Christ. And before that, of course, would be the covenant age, Old Testament age. And then here would be the rapture point. So this is when the church is raptured out. And that'll start the 7-year tribulation period, which we have here. And so this will be the 3.5-year mark, the midpoint of the tribulation period. And that's when the Antichrist will sit on the mercy seat or the throne or whatever you want to call it in the Holy of Holies, proclaiming he's God. And so right now, so we went over the 7 seals. So that was the first, the 7 seals. And now we're starting into the 7 trumpets. So last week, it kind of took a break in the first half of that chapter. And then the last half of the chapter, it was kind of given a future preview of the 144,000's fruit of all the people that were saved and martyred throughout the rest of the tribulation period. And so now it's going to jump back in to the 7th seal. Into the 7th seal. Every time there's a breaking of the last seal, the last trumpet, that doesn't do anything except lead into the next 7 judgments. And so when he breaks the 7th seal, it's going to go into 7 trumpets. And so all these are prior to the 3.5-year midpoint of the tribulation. And so again, I've told you the last 3.5 years, this is called the Great Tribulation. We'll see that several times in the scripture. It talks about the Great Tribulation. That only refers to this last 3.5 years. And so that Great Tribulation is going to be the 7 bowl or vial judgment. And that is when God, so all these judgments are terrible. I mean, trumpet, they're getting progressively worse as we're going through it. The 7 seals were bad enough, but then the 7 trumpets are going to get way worse. I mean, like a third of the planet's going to be wiped out. And so that's before even the halfway point to the tribulation period. So once we get to the tribulation period, and that 3.5-year mark, that's like the turning point for everything. Like that marks so much stuff. One, the Antichrist is going to sit on the mercy seat in the Holy of Holies proclaiming that he's God. Secondly, all of Israel is going to be saved at that point. They're going to be ushered away to a place where God's going to protect them for the last 3.5 years. Third, that's going to be the beginning of the Great Tribulation. Fourthly, nobody after this point will be getting saved. Salvation will end. There'll be the last proclamation of the gospel. Right before that happens, an angel will go throughout the world and proclaim the gospel one last time. And then by this point, by the time the Antichrist sits on that mercy seat, on the Ark of the Covenant, proclaiming he's God, by that point, everyone in the world will already be sealed. They'll either be sealed by the Holy Spirit or they'll be sealed by the beast, by the mark of the beast. So everybody's going to be sealed in one of those camps. So there is no more salvation for anybody because you're either saved or you are under the beast. And so the last 3.5 years, the Great Tribulation is going to be horrific. And that is going to be when God, the time of wrath, God pours his wrath out on the earth. But all of the tribulation period is God's judgment, is God pouring his judgment on the earth for their wickedness. And we're going to see that tonight, especially how that is actually something we should be thankful for and grateful for, that God is holy and just. And that God, because today in our culture, especially in this Western culture, when you say judge or judgment, it's automatically in most people's minds a negative connotation. But judgment is a good thing. Judgment is a beautiful thing when it's righteous judgment. Righteous judgment is a good thing. And so then after the 7-year tribulation period, Christ will return. This time he'll actually touch the earth, and that'll begin the 1,000-year millennial reign. And then when that's over, that's when the angel, one foot on the land and 1 foot on the sea, and he will proclaim, time will be no more. And that'll be the end of time, and that will be the start of eternity. There'll be no more time. It'll just be eternity. And so that'll be the two judgments, the great white throne judgment and the Bema seat. And so we'll get to some of that stuff, but I just want to kind of give a visual to where we're at, because sometimes you can get confused, especially when it's going back and forth sometimes. Some people get confused. So I know that's not a very good little map there. I'd rather have had it sideways. It'd have been longer. I could have drew bigger, but that's all right. So we're going to start with Revelations chapter 8. And questions on that before we go any further? Can't really see that. Does everybody understand it? Let me ask that. So we have the church age, which is what we're in now, the rapture of the church, and then that's the beginning of the 7-year tribulation period. And so we have the tribulation here, and then the 3.5-year mark. So much stuff happens there, and then the Great Tribulation, and then Christ's return, where he physically touches the earth, and he'll actually reign on earth for 1,000 years. All those people that lived through the tribulation period, that are Christian, that became Christian during that time, will live in this time frame with Christ. That's the verses you see in the Bible about the lion will lay down with the lamb, and the wolf play with the kid or whatever, and that nobody will die in that time period. So whoever makes it to this point, they'll live through this 1,000-year period. They're still in the flesh. They're still people, but they're Christians. And so they're going to have children in this 1,000-year period, but nobody will die. And how does that work? I have no idea. Will they get to a certain age and stop getting older? Probably. I don't know. It'd be like the Garden of Eden, I guess, if it would have stayed the Garden of Eden. But so there'll be 1,000 years, and then after the 1,000 years, I kind of didn't say that. So after the 1,000 years, during this 1,000 years, when Christ returns, this, of course, will be Armageddon. That's when the great battle, when Jesus will come back on his horse and all the saints with him. We'll all be on horses with him. And Jesus will come back to the great valley of Megiddo, and there'll be over 100 million man army there. And Christ will destroy them with just his word. and that's when the blood will be up to the horse's bridle. And the Valley of Megiddo, if you don't know, it's like 2 miles wide at some points, and you can imagine how much blood that would have to be for blood to be up to the bridle of a valley that wide. And so that'll be the Battle of Armageddon. And so Christ will destroy all those armies. He'll kill the Antichrist and the beast. And then he'll throw Satan into a bottomless pit. So Christ will be thrown into, Christ will throw the devil into a bottomless pit for 1,000 years. So during this 1,000-year reign of Christ on earth, that's when all the nations of the earth will beat their weapons into plowshares, and there'll be no more war, and Christ will be king over the whole earth, and all the nations will come and worship Christ and honor him and live in obedience to their king. And so they're going to have children during that time, but they'll never be tempted because the tempter is not here. And so Satan will be, in that bottomless pit for 1,000 years. It says he's chained and cast into the bottomless pit. But then after the 1,000 years, for some reason, it says that God will let him out. God will let him out after that 1,000-year reign. And I've always been confused by that. God knows what he's doing. His ways are not my ways. His ways are above my ways. I don't try to figure him out. I have never understood this section of time period, but that's for God, not for me. But there is this 1,000-year millennial reign, and the devil's going to be in that bottomless pit for that period, chained up, and then he's going to be released after that 1,000-year millennial reign. Well, it says when he's released, he's going to come and he's going to entice people. Who's he going to entice? All the people that were born during that 1,000 years that's never had to make a decision. They've never been tempted by the enemy or by the tempter or by sin. They've lived in the presence of Christ. They're king for 1,000 years. And a lot of those people that are born during that time are actually going to fall for his ploys, just like we did. And so a lot of them will follow him. And then it says that Satan will surround the camp of the saints. And then God, once and for all, that'll be this point, the end of the 1,000-year millennial reign, when God himself will cast Satan into the lake of fire, and then we'll have the judgment. So, anyway, we'll get to that later, but just to kind of give you an overview. So we're in chapter 8. We just, as I said last time, we talked about the 144,000, and then we talked about 9 through 17 of chapter 7, the fruits of the 144,000, that multitudes upon multitudes are going to be saved by their preaching. And so it's going to be, I believe, the greatest evangelical event in the history of mankind. And one very good reason is because we can go back to like chapter 6 and see, or chapter 5 or 6, see that all the people know from the very beginning of the 7 seals who's causing all these judgments on the earth. They're going to know because it says, all the way at the very beginning, it says that they're going to cry out for the rocks to fall on them. This is at the beginning of the tribulation time. It says they're going to cry out to the rocks to fall on them, to hide them from him who sits on the throne, from the wrath of the Lamb. So they're going to know. They're going to know. There's, you see movies and books and stuff where it talks about like everybody's going to be trying to figure out and wonder what's going on and all this. I don't think that's how it's going to be. I think they're going to know who's doing this because it tells us that they're going to beg the rocks to fall on them to hide them from him, him who sits on the throne, and from the wrath of the Lamb. So they're going to even know that's Christ, and that it's God pouring his judgment on them because God has said for thousands of years there's going to be a time of judgment coming. I'm going to make all things right. And so we should be thankful and joyful that God is going to do that. And so verse 1, chapter 8, it says, and when he opened the 7th seal, and again, when he opens the 7th seal, when they blow the seventh trumpet, it always is leading into the next 7 judgments. It says, when he had opened the 7th seal, there was silence in heaven about the space of half an hour. Now this is pretty profound. This is a pretty profound event for there to actually be silence in heaven, even for 30 minutes. Because there is a continuous praise to our God in heaven every moment of every day. Holy, holy, holy. We read that in chapters 1, I think, or maybe chapter 3, I can't remember. But those beasts cry out continually, holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty, who liveth and reigneth forever. Here we see there's going to be silence for a space of a half hour. I mean, that, I can't even imagine that, because not only are they crying holy, holy, but there is just worship going on all the time in heaven. So it is, that's what my preacher always says. He says, he always gets on to people for not saying amen or whatever. He says, this will be the quietest place that you'll ever be. He said, because if you go to heaven, it's going to be constant worship and praise. If you go to hell, it's going to be constant wailing and gnashing of teeth. So it's going to be noisy either place you go. So you might as well get used to some noise. But there's going to be silence in heaven for a half an hour. I can't even imagine what that is going to be like. And you could speculate a lot of different views of why the silence happens, but it appears like it's preparation for what's getting ready to happen. Like all of heaven is watching and waiting for these. Again, we've already been through 6 judgments, and they were bad enough. But most of those were natural means. In other words, we went through the 4 horsemen, and we went through what those are more likely going to be. And so they're not going to be, these giant angels riding through the sky, but it's more than likely going to be. Let me get to where they were. So the Lamb opened one of the seals. So the white horse, we talked about him. He had a bow and a crown. We talked about how that's probably going to be a peaceful military campaign at the beginning. And he went forth conquering without conquering, and to conquer. We talked about how that's going to be just the presence of his army. Whoever this is leading this, and he's going to take over these places. Well, eventually, that's not going to keep working, and so that's going to bring in a massive world war. And then we see that in verse 3. And when he had opened the 2nd seal, I saw the 2nd beast say, "Come and see." And when it saw the horse was red, the red horse, and power was given him to take that. Power was given him that sat upon there to take peace from the earth. So again, that's peace throughout the whole earth. And so that's world war. Anyway, I just wanted you to kind of get the feel that those first 6 seals, first off, are like natural disasters, like man, just natural things. But now these 7 trumpets are going to be intensified greatly. Like even from the very first one, it's going to be terrible. It wipes out 1/3 of the people and the plants in the first trumpet. The first trumpet. So it's going to be absolutely terrible. And another thing I was thinking about too is the first 7. These are seals. And how are they initiated? How are they started? Well, each one of them is Christ breaking the seal. That's what causes the event to unfold. Christ breaks the seal, and it causes the event to unfold. Well, here, the 7 trumpets, we have 7 individual angels, and they blow their trumpet, and that causes the event to unfold. And so there's this silence. It's like a preparation and an anticipation for what's getting ready to happen. And again, I told you, at the very beginning, that that righteous judgment is good. Everybody that's in heaven and will be there at this time, So we'll be in with this crowd, but we're not going to think like we think now. We're not going to have twisted and contorted views of reality, but we're going to have perfectly clear minds that think like Christ. And so when we're in heaven with God and we see things as the way they truly are, we're going to be not only glad, but rejoiceful for the judgment of God poured upon the earth. Because it's righteous, it's good, and it is God making all things right. Amen. And so that's the intention. That's what God has promised. If God is not going to make all things right, what do we have to look forward to? And so judgment to the Jews was always a good thing. Now, judgment is a terrible thing. It's a negative connotation. As soon as you talk about judging, or judgment, it's automatically a negative thought. But it's not negative. It's positive when it's righteous judgment. And so all of heaven is not going to be dreading what's getting ready to happen, or anxious or sad, but they're going to be rejoicing that the judgment of God is finally here. Even the earth itself is even right now is moaning. The cosmos is moaning and groaning because of the sins of man. It says the earth itself vomits upon itself because of the sins of man. All of creation gives God glory except his image bearers, except the ones who is called to rule his creation. God created this earth for us, and he created us to rule and to reign this earth. And almost immediately after he gave us this amazing and awesome privilege of ruling and reigning over the earth, having dominion over all of the earth, man and woman, we had dominion over all the earth. Almost immediately after he gave us those keys to the dominion, we handed them to the enemy. We handed them to Satan. We made Satan the god of this world. We started the decaying process of God's beautiful and perfect creation because of our sin and our rebellion. And so God made a promise from all the way from back in Genesis that there is a judgment day coming, and I will make all things right. But thank God that he sent Christ so that we could be on the right side of that judgment, because we would have no hope without it. But again, all throughout Old Testament times and even today, Jews look at judgment as a good and wonderful thing because it's God making things right. Because imagine today if somebody came in and just killed your whole family. That you come home and your family was just horribly murdered, and they caught the person, and so you come to the trial, and the judge is up there, and he just says, the guy says, I'm sorry, I won't do it again. And the judge says, okay, that's fine. Now, you can say whatever you want, but if you were really there and that really happened to your family, you would not be pleased with that judge just not performing his duties and not performing the judgment that was required for the crime that was committed, right? So God is just and holy, and it is even beyond somebody killing your whole family. We have committed treasons infinitely worse than that against the God who created us, because he is perfectly holy. And so what we've done is infinitely worse than that. But the beauty of the gospel is God's not going to let one sin slide. God is just and holy, and he is going to make all things right, and every single sin will be dealt with. But Christ, so we were that convicted criminal, and so God, the judge, so Christ being the judge, he's going to be the judge in the end. The judge looked and said, your crime is too horrific not to be dealt with, not to be paid for. So he came down off the judgment seat, came off his throne, he came out of heaven and came here on earth, and actually paid the whole penalty for us if we put our faith in him. He paid the whole penalty. But if you don't put your faith in him, the judgment's going to have to be met. And here it is. So anyway, I didn't mean to go on that tangent. But so there's silence in heaven for half an hour. And then it says in verse 2, "And I saw the 7 angels which stood before God, and to them were given the 7 trumpets." So we've seen 7 angels before, I think chapter 1 and 2. And we'll see them again. They're significant throughout the whole tribulation period. And we even see that Christ, he had, when it talks about, the 7 candlesticks with the 7 stars, and then Christ in the middle. Christ he's the one that has the 7 stars in his hand, and it says this, it tells us specifically the 7 stars are the angels, and he commands them to go and to do. And so these are the same 7 angels that stand before God, that Christ is the one that tells them what to do. And so now they're the ones that's going to blow these trumpets. They're the ones that's going to issue and carry out the judgment of God upon the earth. And so they're given 7 trumpets. And it says in verse 3, "And another angel came and stood at the altar, having a golden censer. And there was given unto him much incense, that he should offer it with the prayer or prayers of all the saints upon the golden altar which was before the throne. And the smoke of the incense which came up with the prayers of the saints ascended up before God out of the angel's hand." So this angel, he comes before the altar of God that's in heaven before his throne, and he has this golden censer, and he's got much incense, it says. And he's going to offer the incense. This, incense, you burn it and the smoke rises up. It's an offering. They did it in the temple to God. They had to keep a continual incense going in the temple. Well, here it is as in heaven. Everything here is a foreshadowing of what's there. And so this incense is burning before the throne of God, but this angel has a golden censer of the incense, but also he mixes it with the prayers of the saints. Now, I got a picture of this and thought about this and thought about what is happening here. What does this mean? And so what is God getting ready to do? He's getting ready to pour judgment upon the earth. Why? For unrighteousness and wickedness. And so here we see that the angels offering this incense mixed with the prayers of all the saints upon the golden altar which it was before the throne. So imagine all the prayers of the saints in the past, all the persecution that they encountered, all the prophets even of Old Testament who were killed by their own people. Jesus said, "You've killed all your prophets. I've sent you prophets centuries after centuries, and you've killed them all." And then you come to the Christian age when there's a massive persecution and martyrdom. I mean, thousands and hundreds of thousands, millions of Christians have been martyred over the centuries. All the prayers of the saints, all those prayers of the martyrs that's been persecuted and then killed by evil, wicked men that were ruled by their father, the enemy, the devil, all their murders now are going to be rectified. That not one of those persecutions and murders are going to be in vain, but their prayers are coming up before the throne of God, and now he's going to deal. He's going to pour out his wrath upon the earth. He's going to pour out judgment upon the earth for every persecution and all the prayers of the saints, everything that they've endured on this earth under the hand of ungodly and wicked men. And so now that it's coming before the altar of God, the smoke, it's figurative, of course, but it's also literal. Like it's literal that God is our prayers are so precious to him, and the people that endure persecution, there's never going to be one thing wasted. There's never going to be one thing forgotten. There's never going to be one thing that's not dealt with. That they may torture and persecute us here on earth. They may kill us here on earth. But they will pay the very last ounce of what they've done here on earth, even if we don't see it. That in the next life or in this life, I don't know, we don't know where, but this life or the next, they will pay for everything they've ever done to God's children. Nothing. And so this to me is what this is. It's all the prayers of the saints, all the prayers of the martyrs, all the prayers of the persecuted coming up before God. And today I wrote, incense with prayers of the saints, God's promise of judgment upon wickedness. So God's promise has always been judgment upon the wickedness. That's one of the atheists or agnostics, one of their, arguments, I guess. Complaints or arguments against God is, if God's so good, why is there wickedness? Why is there evil? Why don't God punish them? Why does God allow, people to be raped? Why does God allow Christians to be martyred? If God is God, if God is there, why does he allow this? But there is a judgment day coming. There is nothing escaping the judgment of God. And it's either going to fall on Jesus Christ, his Son, if you put faith in him, or it's going to fall on you, whether in this life or in the next. But the judgment is coming. Nothing will be escaped from God's judgment. And it says, the wickedness is now carried out. Saints' persecutions and deaths by evil men are now being dealt with by God, pouring his wrath on them. God will make all things right. We should be filled with joy and gladness of God's judgment. It is holy and it is a wonderful thing. So this is God's judgment poured upon the men, and this is the prayers of the saints coming up before him. And in verse 5 it says, and the angel, so this very same angel that burned the incense and offered it with the prayers of the saints, and now it's come up before the throne of God, and now it's time to issue the judgments. And it says, and the angel took the censer he had in his hand, and he filled it with fire of the altar. So this is the altar of God in heaven, and he cast it into the earth. And there were voices and thunderings and lightnings and an earthquake. So again, all we can do is speculate on what actually occurs. It could be a meteorite, it could be a number of things, but this is the beginning of the trumpet. So this ain't the first trumpet, by the way. This is just the beginning. This is just so the seventh seal's been broken. There's silence, and then there's this the prayers and the incense burnt, and then that same angel takes the censer and gets the fire off the altar of God and throws it into the earth, and then this happens. And also another thing makes me think of that altar that's before the throne of God in heaven. That's the same one that we see Isaiah when he's in heaven. And we went over that a couple weeks ago, Isaiah, Ezekiel, and John's visions of heaven. And when Isaiah was there, he said, he grabs his mouth, and says, "Oh, I'm undone. I'm dead." In other words, is what he's saying. I'm undone. I'm a man of unclean lips. He's standing before the throne of God. And what happens? That angel of the Lord, this same angel, that angel of the Lord runs, and it says he gets what is it? The what? Yeah, he gets a live coal, but the things that pick up the live coal. Tongs. So the angel runs and gets the tongs. Like this is, I love just the sense of urgency, even from the angel. And he gets the live coal out of this same altar we're talking about right here, before the throne of God. And he runs to Isaiah and he puts it on his lips. And he burns, he purifies his lips. And so this is that same altar before the throne of God. And so this angel takes the censer, back to Revelations 8, or chapter 5, verse 5, and he takes that censer and he throws that fire down to the earth. And again, I don't know what the voices, the thunderings, the lightnings. I know what the earthquake is, of course, and maybe the lightnings, but the voices and thunderings. I'm assuming this is just some catastrophic event that is known worldwide. I don't know what else that is, but verse 6. it says, and the 7 angels which had 7 trumpets. So here we're getting ready to start the actual trumpets. You would think we're already into it, but we're not. 7 trumpets prepared themselves to sound. The first angel sounded, and there followed hail and fire mingled with blood, and they were cast upon the earth, and the third part of the trees was burned up, and all the green grass was burned up. Can you imagine a third part of the trees in all of the world is burned up? That's not just going to be, bad as far as agriculture, but that's going to be bad as far as oxygen. A third part of the trees on all the earth being burned up is going to start causing some serious worldwide problems. Not let alone the fruit trees. So this is going to be a massive, terrible thing. So a third part of the trees and all the green grass. So here you have all the things that eat grass, all the animals that eat grass. Well, they're going to be in trouble at least for a while. I don't think this is going to last long. I think the grass will come back pretty quickly. But it says a third of the trees and all the green grass was burned up. That's really unimaginable. And then it says in verse 8, the second angel sounded. So here's the second angel. He's blowing the second trumpet. And as it were, a great mountain burning with fire was cast into the sea, and a third part of the sea became blood. I wish I could remember, but this, of course, I believe is a meteorite. So a great mountain falling from the sky, falling into the sea, and burning with fire, cast into the sea, and the third part of the sea become blood. I think this is a meteorite. And I was reading something a couple weeks ago. It happened over Siberia, and it happened in the early 1900s, I believe. But it was a meteorite that come into the Earth's atmosphere, and I think it was 300 yards wide. But when it came into the atmosphere, it exploded, of course, over Siberia, and luckily there was nobody there. But it exploded, and so just 300 yards. That's not really that big, you're thinking. Exploded, and just with the force and the speed and the heat with which it hit and exploded, I think it was 800 miles of trees completely gone, decimated, burnt. Just 800 miles or something like that. I'll have to look it up and get back with you, but I was thinking if something that small could do that much devastation, it's very easily to see that God could send down a meteor that's a mile wide and cast it into the sea and easily kill a third part of the sea. And it says a third part of the sea become blood. That could just be from death, from the animals that lived in the sea. But that's easy for us to think about today. You think about the people back then, when they wrote this, that's kind of, to me, another evidence that this is, evidence of its truth is they wouldn't have known about meteorites then, 2,000 years ago. They would not have known about meteorites or any of that, astronomical stuff. And so this, to me, is describing a meteorite, a mountain falling from heaven that falls into the sea, that's on fire as it's falling. Sounds like a meteorite to me. And then it's cast into the sea, and a third part of the sea became blood. And it says, and the third part of the creatures which were in the sea and had life died, and the third part of the ships were destroyed. So we've got a third part of the trees in the earth gone. We have all the green grass burned up. We have a third part of the seas, the oceans, are now blood, poisoned, or not, I'm going to say poison because they'll get poisoned here in a minute. This is blood, so everything died in it because of the heat, I think. And the third part of the sea, or the creatures that were in the sea, so a third part of the ocean's life are dead. I just can't imagine how catastrophic that's going to be to human life on earth, how much of a struggle this is going to be to even survive for the rest of the time. And we're only on the second trumpet. We're still like way over here. So we're not far into this thing, and already we're seeing, just worldwide devastation everywhere. So you can see how either people are going to run to the Lord when these 144, the stage is going to be set for this 144,000 evangelists that's going to be going throughout the world preaching the gospel. Where you see, can you imagine this happening? You're either going to turn to the Lord or you're going to hate the Lord for doing this. That's your two options. But there's going to be no more unbelief. That'll be a thing of the past. You're either going to turn to the Lord or you're going to hate him for what he's doing to you. You're going to say he is, even today, we see today, you turn on your TV and listen to those people, it's not a matter of unbelief. They talk about how evil and how wicked our God is. They speak of him as he's real, but they speak of how evil and how wicked his ways are and his word is. It's not a matter of unbelief, but they don't like him. They love darkness rather than light. And in days, men will call good evil and evil good. That's exactly what's happening, and that's exactly what's going to happen then. It's not going to be a matter of unbelief, but it's going to be a matter of, and we can already see it. Like this is already a reality where people will look up to God, believe he exists, but don't want anything to do with him and actually think he's bad. I actually heard a progressive Christian, I've told y'all this before, progressive Christian, he's not a Christian, but they call themselves Christians, but progressive Christian pastor, it's one of the fastest growing churches in America. But I heard him preaching out of Genesis, and he was talking about the event with Adam and Eve. Did I tell you all this already? Because I don't want to tell you again. So he's talking about the event in Genesis where Adam and Eve, God told them not to eat of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And so this pastor was saying that the reason God did not want them to eat of the tree of knowledge of good and evil is because they would become like him with knowledge of good and evil, which was true. They would have the knowledge of good and evil. That's what God told them. And that God was scared of them. He was scared of the consequences because he didn't know what would really happen. This is a pastor, a famous pastor. He's one of the most famous progressive pastors. But then he said, listen to this. So he said, then the devil comes along, and the devil tells him, says, if you eat this, he says, you'll be like God. He said, you ain't going to die. You're going to be like God. And so the pastor goes on and on and on. And his conclusion was the devil was telling them the truth and God was lying to them. And he said, Jesus came to fix what the Old Testament God did wrong. That's what he said. And so in his version of Genesis, the devil's the good guy and God is the bad guy. We're seeing that supposedly within the church. Again, they're not Christian. But we're seeing that in the church. How easily is it going to be here when God is actually pouring and making, he's not trying to hide it at all. He's not a mystery anymore. He's pouring his judgment on you for your wickedness. So they're either going to run to him or they're going to hate him even worse than they already do because they already hate him. They're already the children of Satan here on earth, that the spirit of Antichrist who hates God. It's not a matter of unbelief. It definitely won't be at this time. So it says, try to hurry. So the first angel sounded, their father, where am I? What verse am I? 10? Yeah, 10. And the third angel sounded, and there fell a great star from heaven, burning as it were a lamp, and it fell upon the third part of the rivers and upon the fountains of the waters. Again, I think this is a meteorite. I think God's using a meteorite for both parts, the sea and the rivers. And it says, and the name of the star is called wormwood. So wormwood means bitter and poison. And we see that always, you can see that word several times in the Old Testament. And it means poison usually. Don't drink the water. It's wormwood. So it says, and the name of the star was called wormwood. And the third part of the waters became wormwood. And many men died of the waters because they were made bitter or poisonous. Okay, so now So we've got a third part of the trees gone. All the grass is burned up. A third part of the ocean is uninhabitable. And a third of the creatures in the ocean are dead. And now a third part of our fresh water is contaminated, is poisonous. A third part of our fresh water in the whole earth. Again, this just gets, you can see, this is just getting more and more catastrophic. This is terrible. And it would be, that's why, praise God, we don't want to be here during this time. You don't want your family here during this time. Yes, they may get saved. Yes, a lot of people are going to get saved. But who wants to go through this? This is going to be terrible, terrible. Then number 12, it says, and the fourth angel sounded, and the third part of the sun was smitten, and the third part of the moon, and the third part of the stars. So as the third part of them was darkened, the day shone not for a third part of it, and the night likewise. So 8 hours of the day, 4 hours into the day and 4 hours into the night, is going to be absolutely pitch black. No stars, no moon, no sun. 8 hours of absolute darkness. So a third part of the day and the night, where we have some light in the night, the moon and the stars, none. So 8 hours of the 24-hour periods are going to be absolute pitch black. I went into a coal mine one time. I was 4 miles under a mountain. Took 45 minutes to get there. And they had me turn my lamp off. And you have never felt darkness like that. Like you can put your hand right here. Nothing. You almost feel that darkness. You almost feel it. And so when I read things like that, it's going to be complete darkness for 8 hours. And then when we talk about outer darkness, complete, Jesus throws them into outer darkness. That's a darkness you can feel. It's a complete absence of light. Like what is hell? Hell is the absolute complete absence of light. No light whatsoever. It's a darkness you can feel, and it's the absence of any goodness, any mercy, any love, any compassion, any goodness that you've ever experienced will be lacking there. It's absolute darkness. Darkness you can feel, and I feel like it's going to be like that here. Like this is going to be like in the days of Egypt when God caused darkness upon the land. It said you could feel the darkness, if you remember that in the Exodus. Verse 13, it says, and I beheld and heard an angel flying through the midst of heaven, saying with a loud voice, woe, woe, woe to the inhabitants of the earth by reason of the other voices of the trumpets. Can you imagine? I just told you, a third part of everything is gone. A third part of the trees, all the grass is gone. A third part of the ocean is gone. A third part of the ocean's creatures are gone. A third part of our fresh water is gone. People are dying just from the poison of the water. And now you have an angel flying throughout the world, crying, woe, 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 unto the inhabitants of the earth by the reason of the other voice of the trumpet of the three angels which are yet to sound. In other words, these are going to be much worse. Can you imagine that? These are going to be much worse. We're only 4 trumpets in, but he's saying it's going to get much worse from here. And so we're going to finish out, I'm not going to finish them tonight, but we'll finish out the trumpets next week and then get into, well, we won't get into the 7 bowl or vial judgments. But can you imagine, we went through the 7 seals, we saw the devastation of the world war, the famine all over the world by the 4 horsemen, and then pestilence and all that going on. And now we're seeing the trumpets, a third part of everything is just being wiped out. And we ain't even got halfway through that. Can you imagine how bad the bowl judgments are going to be? Because this is just getting progressively worse. And the 7 bowl judgments, this again, these are different than this. There's 21 judgments. These 2 are on this side of the tribulation. So these ain't part of the great tribulation. These are just, people are still being saved. There's still a reason for this. God's pouring out his judgment on the earth, but he's still allowing men and women to come to him to be saved. But after that, no more.